Hello, my most beloved and murderous horde. Welcome back. I am, of course, your mistress of murder, Lady Kempo, and you all know my son, Charlie. Say hello, Charlie. First and foremost, my horde, I would like to apologize to you all for my extended absence. You see, I have been unable to reach you as I have been away on business, trying to make alliances and such. Unfortunately, my horde, it seems that I have been quite unsuccessful. It appears my once grand and infamous reputation has been lost to history. What a pity. But I assure you, my horde, your beloved mistress of murder has returned to you, and my status in your realm will be restored, one drop of blood at a time. Speaking of which, let's get on to today's discussion, shall we? Upon this night, yet another soul has wandered into my realm, and this one with a reputation almost as infamous as my own. He is a killer that, to be frank, I have waited by far too long to speak with. So without further ado, my horde, you know the drill by now. Pick your poison, sit back, relax, and let's have ourselves a little conversation. I was born with the very devil within me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer no more than the poet can help the inspiration to song, nor the ambition of an intellectual man to be great. The inclination to murder came to me as naturally as the inspiration to do right comes to the majority of persons. This was famously stated by none other than Dr. H. Holmes, otherwise known as Herman Webster Mudgett, also known as the Beast of Chicago or the Devil in the White City, due to his association with the Columbian Expedition or the Chicago World's Fair, the very thing that put the city of Chicago on the map. Now, on May 7th of 1896, Henry Howard Holmes was executed by hanging for the murder of his associate Benjamin Pitezel. Now, despite Holmes' confession to killing 27 other people, some of those people were actually later discovered to be alive, he is officially linked to 9 murders, though some estimates actually have Holmes with a killing spree up to 200 people. But these claims may or may not have been exaggerated. By the time H. Holmes, real name Herman Webster Mudgett, arrived in Chicago in 1886, he was already a wanted man. As a con artist and a bigamist, he fled from one town to the next, avoiding prison time for various scams, including insurance fraud of a ghastly nature. Holmes was stealing and mutilating medical cadavers and pretending they were victims of accidents to collect the insurance money. Now, unfortunately, back then there was no DNA testing, so this was actually a pretty easy crime to get away with. However, Holmes had more monstrous ideas tinkering around in his dark mind. Soon after arriving in Chicago, he found work as a pharmacist and quickly began plans on building what is now known as his murder castle, otherwise known as the World's Fair Motel or Hotel, depending on who you ask. Now, this building was a 3-story building that took up the entire block of 63rd and Wallace Street. Holmes called it the World's Fair Hotel to accommodate tourists who would be arriving in the droves for the 1893 Columbian Expedition, otherwise known as the Chicago World's Fair. His victims of choice? Young female drifters searching for a new and exciting life in the big city. An article written in 1937, the Chicago Tribune, describes Holmes' murder castle in this way. Oh, what a queer house it was. In all America, there was none other like it. Its chimneys stuck out where chimneys should never stick out. Its stairways ended nowhere in particular. Winding passages brought the uninitiated with a frightful jerk back to where they had started from. There were rooms that had no doors. There were doors that had no rooms. A mysterious house it was indeed, a crooked house, a reflux of the builder's own distorted mind. In that house occurred dark and eerie deeds. The Peitzel family were the known victims of Holmes, Father Benjamin and three of his children, daughters Alice and Nellie, and his little son Howard. The family was killed during the fall of 1894. Instead of using a cadaver, Holmes used his former business partner, Benjamin Peitzel, as part of his insurance fraud scheme. Holmes knocked Ben out and killed him by setting him on fire. On July 15th of 1895, Alice and Nellie's bodies were found in a Toronto cellar. Later, authorities found teeth and pieces of bone amongst charred ruins that belonged to Howard in an Indianapolis cottage that Holmes had rented. Of Holmes' assumed victims were Julia and her daughter Pearl Connor in 1891, Emilian Singrad in 1892, and sisters Minnie and Nanny Williams in 1893. Minnie had married Holmes, who was swindled out of her insurance and inheritance as well. The bodies of Julie, Amelia, and Minnie and Nanny were never found, but rumor had it that Holmes probably sold their cadavers to medical schools. In fact, it is a well-known fact in the city of Chicago that one of its medical schools, that I will keep unnamed for its own protection, actually still has the skeleton of one of Holmes's victims and still uses it for classes to this day. Now, Holmes had consistently stated that Julia and Amelia had died while undergoing illegal abortions. Julia was allegedly Holmes's lover, and Ameline was Holmes' former secretary, whom he later reportedly proposed to. While searching Holmes's hotel, authorities recovered Minnie's watch chain and Nanny's garter buckle in one of the ovens. Although forensics evidence was rudimentary at best at the time, bones found in the basement most likely belonged to a 12-year-old Pearl Connor, whom he allegedly poisoned, and whose bones were actually hidden in a pile of soup bones, quite ingeniously, actually. Now, as for Emile, the police believe they had come upon her hair and bones also in the basement of his murder castle. One account claims that an eyewitness saw Holmes and his janitor haul out a big trunk the day after her appearance and dumping it in the Chicago River, though this has never been fully proven. Although there is a lengthy list of other potential victims Holmes may have murdered, these 9 victims have been plausibly attributed to the serial killer's killing spree. Now, just before his execution, Holmes was said to be pleasant and calm. The only request he had was for his body to be buried 10 feet deep into the ground, rather than 6, with his casket encased in cement. Apparently, he didn't want grave robbers to dig up his body and use it for dissection. How ironic. When Holmes was finally hung from the gallows, it is said that his neck did not snap. Instead, he died a slow death of strangulation, his body twitching until he was finally pronounced dead 20 minutes later. So, very interesting about Dr. H.H. Holmes is that he in fact is thought to be the true identity of the one Jack the Ripper. As I said, old Jackie Boy will be returning to this channel many times over, as he is my favorite. Now, this is collaborated and was actually even further investigated into in 2017, I believe, by Dr. H.H. Holmes, or Herman Webster Mudgett's own great-great-grandson. A very interesting series on the History Channel called The American Ripper. It's a very good series. I saw it myself, and I do recommend it to all of you. Now, during this investigation, it was found that the initial profile for Jack the Ripper was actually completely incorrect and was later changed to that of an American doctor, which Holmes was, as Holmes is one of the very few serial killers to actually go to a higher education and not drop out. The only other one that I can personally think of offhand would be Ted Bundy and possibly Gacy. However, those two both have a history of dropping out of those colleges. Now, the reason why he is thought to be Jack the Ripper, not only due to his medical background and the capability he would have had to actually commit such crimes, was the fact that not only was it speculated that Jack the Ripper may have been left-handed or even ambidextrous, though this is not confirmed, Holmes was also suspected to be one or the other as well. Not only that, two of Holmes's aliases that was frequently used for his insurance swindles were seen both coming into Whitechapel right before the murders and leaving Whitechapel immediately after the murders. This is very interesting. Not only that, but also in the biography of the American Ripper, as depicted on the History Channel, a criminal profiler actually drew a sketch of what Jack the Ripper could have looked like due to the eyewitness accounts, and the resemblance between H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper are in fact quite compelling and eerily striking. The two could very easily pass as one another, so either we are left with Holmes is the Ripper, or Holmes had one hell of a doppelganger. Piece of note was actually the murder castle itself. Now, the murder castle was kind of a hotel. This is about half true. The building was sometimes referred to as the World's Fair Hotel, but it doesn't seem to have functioned as a hotel in the modern sense of the word. The first floor was mostly businesses. The second was mostly labs, as well as murdering equipment. Most of these flats were on the third floor and seemed to have functioning mainly as extended stay apartments, not as more modern hotel rooms. There was also no front desk. People paid rent, as in 1891. The building was a two-story affair. However, Holmes borrowed about $3,000 from a resident to add the third floor using flats during the fair, and the third floor was then built, but to the extent to which he was never rented it out is debatable. It was also built so cheaply that one worker examining the roof in March of '93 put his foot right through the floor, and the lender eventually sued Holmes for pocketing most of the money and not paying it back. It certainly didn't operate all through the fair. Holmes tried to torch it actually a few times, the more successful time being in August of '93. Legal records indicate that he had actually put lots of insurance policies onto it as well. Interesting fact is that the murder castle in Chicago was not the only murder castle that Holmes had created. In fact, I believe it was in Fort Worth, Texas, he was actually planning and starting construction on a second murder castle, had he not been caught due to his murders of Benjamin Peitzel and 3 of the Peitzel children. It is quite possible that this killing spree could have very easily reached into the thousands of victims. There is even a very interesting curse that has occurred after the execution of Dr. Holmes. You see, many believe that he had in fact escaped death. However, there are some things that do prevent this from happening, including a DNA test that happened just in 2017 that proved that, in fact, that the body in the grave was that of H.H. Holmes. However, there are some things that happened immediately after his death that can't exactly be explained away. For instance, the very office that the trial had been held in burned to the ground not long after. The only item that remained intact was a picture of H.H. Holmes himself. A janitor who is believed to have known about Holmes's illegal activities committed suicide. his note reading but one line, "I couldn't sleep." The man who helped testify and put Holmes away was later on shot and killed by Chicago cops. Judges of the trial fell ill, and even the district attorney of the time found his luck to be very, very bad indeed. All of these events, though separately not very notable, are rather interesting, as it did spark the H.H. Holmes curse. Even in Holmes's own words himself, that for his execution even stated that he was turning into the devil himself, as even his face was turning more demonic, and perhaps he was right, as even though all the equipment that was used to hang him was working properly, it took him 20 minutes to die, as his neck did not snap. A very interesting man indeed, right up to death itself. However, my most beloved horde, that is all the time I have for you this evening. I do hope you enjoyed the video. And remember, haunting dreams and blessed be.